Okay, last time we did Kiddush. So, we're up to Maggid. I don't know. In the art scroll, Siddur, in the art scroll Haggadah, it's on page 67. Now, those who can find it, show the other people. Otherwise, you can bring it to me. I'll find it for you. Do you have it? Does everybody have it? Halach ma'anya. The beginning of Maggid. No, nobody has it. Okay.
Karpas?
No, after Karpas.
Yachas?
Here. Ha, lachma, anya. Aramaic words.
Lachma?
Okay.
I can find it.
Yeah, okay, but how everybody else? Does everybody have it?
Maggid or what?
Yes, Maggid, the beginning of Maggid. Fine, okay, if you have it, that's good. Okay, now these are words, these are words in Aramaic, because that was the language that was spoken at the time when the Mishnah was written. And these were not said at the beginning of the Seder as we say them, as you will see. Not all of them anyway. This is the bread of poverty. You have written affliction, undoubtedly. But the word in Hebrew, ayin nun, yud, or ayin nun hey, oni, that word means poverty. It means lacking resources. It does not connote pain. The mitzvah on Yom Kippur is ta'anuas nafshel seichem. It does not mean stick yourself with pins and sleep on sandpaper and turn off the air conditioning and so on and so on. That's not what it is. It's poverty, which our ancestors ate in Egypt. Anyone who is in need, let him come and eat. Anyone who needs to should join us in the Paschal sacrifice. This had to be said in the mid-afternoon because in order to eat the Paschal sacrifice, you had to be counted in the company of this particular sacrifice before it was sacrificed in the afternoon. If not, you couldn't come at night. So you couldn't say this at 7 p.m. and after nightfall say, oh, anybody wants to join? By all means, you're welcome. It wouldn't be kosher. These words had to be said before. But we're reciting them because we're expressing a sense of charity and generosity and solidarity with people. Now we say, this year we are here. Next year, let us be in the land of Israel. Okay, time for a trick quiz. Do we say these words when we're sitting here in Yerushalayim?
Yes.
Why do we do that? Are they not? It doesn't say anything about Pesach. It says in the land of Israel.
We don't know what will happen next year.
Yeah, but okay. It says this year we are here. Next year let us be in the land of Israel. Doesn't that imply that this year here isn't in the land of Israel? Not necessarily. Well, why? I don't understand. Why not say it? Why say this year here? Just say this year. Next year, let's be in the land of Israel. Why it's contrasted with where you are now? Yeah.
You want for all people to be in the land of Israel?
Yeah. Who says the we is me and my family? This is one of the places we identify with the Jewish people as a whole. Who's the we, according to you? No, it includes everybody. We as a people are not in the land of Israel. We don't even have the majority in the land of Israel, which would trigger certain laws, deraisa, which are not agricultural laws, according to almost all opinions, are only rabbinic today because the majority of Jews don't live in the land of Israel. The people of Israel isn't in the land of Israel. Some Jews are here, and we're very thankful for that, but the return in that sense is not taking place. Now it says, and this year we are slaves, next year we should be free. Well, some Jews in some places are slaves, and again we could identify with the people who are not experiencing freedom. The tricky thing here is to separate the two of them. One is geographical and the other is political, and they're independent. You could be outside the land of Israel and yet be free, that's possible. And you could be inside the land of Israel and yet be slaves. Like when, for example, the Hellenist Jews took over and defiled the Beis HaMikdash and set up schools to teach Hellenistic religion, Hellenistic philosophy to Jews in Greek in Israel. You could be a slave in Israel also. So the two are quite independent. We want geographical location and also a condition of freedom. Yeah.
Regarding both, can we take like a softer tone with them? So for instance, we might be in bondage simply if like we're enslaved to our taivas and our yitzhar and so on. So there's a sense of personal freedom from there. And the other one, in the other case, it's like you might be in the land of Israel, but the land of Israel might be in a terrible state. And so it could be reinvigorated next year, could take on its truer form.
I don't see any reason to go to poetry. I mean, there are people who can read Ramozim into these things, but I don't see it in the...
I never need a reason to go to poetry.
Yeah, I've noticed. Okay, now comes a very difficult, problematic, and very well-known passage, the 4 questions. Wow. So let's read through the translation and then we'll question the translation. Why is this night different from all the nights? For, on all the nights, when we eat chometz and matzahs, this night only matzahs. For, on all the nights, we eat any kind of vegetables, this night, morer, bitter vegetables. For, on all the nights, we're not required to eat or dip our vegetables even once. This night we're required to eat so twice. For all the nights we eat sitting upright or reclining. This night we will all recline. Is that 4 questions? 4 questions? What do you have written on the page there? How would you describe it? Wouldn't you describe it as 1 question with 4 answers? Why is this night different? I'll tell you why it's different. Take a look around. Open up your eyes. You'll see very well it's different in lots and lots of respects. Why is it called 4 questions? That's 1 question. Second of all, who's asking this question? Should we imagine that this is a very bright Jewish 5-year-old who's looking at the goings-on and he's surprised because they're unfamiliar to it, doesn't remember last year. Of course, what he sees every Friday night is different, so on and so on. And he's, wow, hey, Dad, what's going on here? Is that a possible way to read these questions? Or these items, these observations?
Yeah.
Certainly not. They could not possibly be read that way. Why not? Because some of them haven't happened yet. Some of them haven't happened yet. He sees matzah on the table. That's nice. But as it says, other nights of the year we eat matzah and chametz. How does he know birthday cake isn't coming later? Who told him? The 5-year-old who doesn't remember last year. Dip twice. He only saw 1 dip. He didn't see the 2 dippings. The meal hasn't come out yet. How do you know everyone's going to recline at the meal? These can't be questions of an ignorant person who's observing goings on that he doesn't understand. First of all, because in the questions you have items that haven't been observed yet, and outside there are things that have happened which he should have asked about. We washed our hands, didn't make a blessing, and didn't eat bread. That never happens on any Friday night. He should have asked about that. We had a piece of vegetable before Kiddush. We never do that. He should have asked about that. So that's not the right understanding of who's asking the question. Okay, now furthermore, the translation is wrong. The expression in Hebrew, a ma, in front of a description of an event, ma is what, not why. And a ma in front of a description of an event is an exclamation. The correct punctuation should have been how different this night is from other nights! Exclamation point. And then you have 4 descriptions of how the night is different. And the exclamation point says, pay attention! Something's going on here. Something that needs thought. Something that needs investigation. Take a look at what's going on here. I'm telling you the shot of the Abarbanel now. So, the Abarbanel sees it here, what I would call a 4-part question. A question of 4 parts. And here's how he analyzes it. Let's take a look at the symbols that this passage singles out. One is matzah. What is matzah? We just read the introduction. What is matzah?
Poverty.
Poverty, the bread of poverty. We ate when we were slaves in Egypt, right? So the matzahs, at least here, symbolize the slavery in Egypt. And we have to eat bitter vegetables. The bitterness of the vegetables symbolizes the slavery in Egypt. I hope that's a no-brainer. That's why you eat it, because it was bitter in Egypt on being a slave. On the other hand, tonight, listen, we're eating vegetables. Come on, we don't just eat vegetables. We have a sauce, and we dip our vegetables. We are landed gentry. We are, upper class. We don't just eat vegetable salad. We have it. Today, everybody's like that. But today, in those days, and then we have banqueting couches, thank you very much. We're not sitting down at the kitchen table, and having a snack. We're at a banquet. Those are expressions of freedom. And now the Abarbanel says, the problem here is this. We have many commemorations in the Jewish calendar, commemorations of past events, and they fall into 2 types. Some are commemorations of great victories, great salvations, great miracles, great wonderful things that God did for us, like the Shavuos when we received the Torah, and Sukkot when we had the clouds of glory, and Hanukkah when the oil burnt longer, Purim that we just went through. Some celebrate great victories, and some commemorate great tragedies, like Yeshivat Ohr, where we commemorate the destruction of the temple, and the other fast days when terrible things happen, and we mourn over our failures and the punishments God sent to us. You have commemoration days in the Jewish calendar. Each commemoration day is one-dimensional. Either it commemorates a great victory, salvation, and miracle, or it commemorates a great tragedy and punishment. In this celebration, the night of the Seder, you have 2 symbols of slavery and 2 symbols of freedom. What is going on? What is being expressed by the symbols in this performance? Now, the answer is in the next words of the Haggadah, which is very good for having 4 questions, right? We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and Hashem took us out of there. What is the answer? What does that verse tell you the answer is? The question is, why do we have 2 sets of contradictory symbols? What is the answer? What are we commemorating?
2 things.
Nope.
One thing, rescue.
Okay, but now put it in terms of the question that I asked. You're right, but put it in terms of the question. I said there's some symbols of slavery, some symbols of freedom. And it's a 2-dimensional picture. We don't have 2-dimensional pictures. What thing are we commemorating?
Our freedom. The fact that we were slaves and that we're no longer slaves.
Okay, it's the transition between the 2. It's the transition between the 2.
Like coming out of Egypt and then coming into the land? Or that's
No. Being slaves in Egypt you're commemorating, and you're also commemorating being free. The single message is the transition from slavery to freedom. You're standing with one leg inside and one leg outside, and you're shifting your weight from one to the other. So there's slavery is one thing, freedom is another thing, and transitioning from one to the other is also something. It's a process. It's not a state, but it's a process. And here you're commemorating a process, not a state. That's the answer of the Haggadah to the question, and it becomes unique because the other ones don't transition. They don't commemorate processes. They commemorate states. Yeah.
So do the bitter herbs and the dip show the transition period in the middle?
It's 2 and 2.
But then why do you need 4? Why couldn't you just have 2?
I don't know. There are other Muslims. I mean, that won't be explained by the point that I'm making now. This answers what it's doing here. That's one way to understand the so-called 4 questions, and you have to understand that the phraseology, the literal phraseology, ma in front of a description is an exclamation of how much it is. It's a exclamation. How this night is different. How different this night is from other nights. Ma nora hamokum hazeh. Ein zeh kiyum beis elokim v'zeh sha'ar shamayim. Jacob wakes up from his dream. He sees the ladder of the angels going up and down. He says, Ma nora hamokum hazeh. Ma, this place is awesome. Not asking how many awesome points does it get. 72 awesome points or 94 awesome points. Not asking a question at all. How awesome this place is. Not how awesome is this place with a question mark. How awesome this place is with an exclamation point. That's the correct way to translate it. Okay. Now let's take a look at this verse. This statement of the Haggadah. That has a very interesting structure. We were once slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt. We. But Hashem, our God, took us out from there with a strong hand, outstretched arm. Okay, cognize that. Put that in your memory bank. Okay, we were once slaves in Egypt. Now look at the next sentence. If the Holy One, blessed be He, had not brought our fathers out from Egypt, then we, our children's children, would have, I think been is a better translation, enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. According to the first sentence, who were slaves in Egypt? We were. According to the second sentence, were we slaves in Egypt? Say again? Not we. Adarabah. It says, had Hashem not taken our forefathers out, our forefathers, not us, had He not taken our forefathers out, then we would have been slaves. But in fact, He did take our forefathers out, and that's why we weren't slaves. Hello! In the space of 2 sentences, you have a contradiction. So what's the answer got to be? I gave you the answer really before, but I didn't put it in this context. He's hanging over from Purim. What does the answer have to be? In the first sentence, the we is?
Some. What we said before, like the previous we said before is that not all the Jews are
So use the right word. The we is the?
inclusive
Of what?
of
All the Jewish
All
people
the
across
Jewish
time.
The Jewish people, right? Sometimes I like to make fun of the students who come from Great Britain. And I remind them that 250 years ago, we won the Revolutionary War. You lost it. So, imagine one saying to me, you fought 250, you're that old? Really? You were there and you were fighting? The we is America, right? And you is UK. And there was a war between our nations 250 years ago. The we means the nation. It carries out the same idea, identification of the nation. Our nation was slaves, but we personally weren't slaves. We personally benefited from the fact that Hashem took us out of Egypt. Now, we will see, because Hashem, as soon as we have enough time, we'll see that this perspective expressed here in the Haggadah is superseded in the middle of the Haggadah by a different perspective, where in a certain sense, we too experience the exodus from Egypt, but that's not here yet. Just like the matzah is here only, the matzah of slavery, and it will transform into a different matzah halfway through. When it says, why do we eat these matzahs? We have a different explanation altogether. So we transform. The whole process of the Haggadah is a kind of self-transformation, as we will see in more detail. But here it's already built into these details. You with me so far? Okay. Now, notice the change of vocabulary. People ask, what do you mean? If God had not taken us out of Egypt, we would have been enslaved in Egypt forever? I mean, kingdoms come and go, no kingdom, don't tell us the Americans, but no kingdom lasts forever. So why would you have thought, you say, okay, go, the Haggadah is telling me, I believe what the Haggadah says, God would have kept it that way. Maybe, but notice that the word in the sentence changes. It says we were avodim, and it says, had God not taken our ancestors out, we would have been mishuabadim. Mishuabad and eved are not the same word. They have the same root, but they're not the same word. So what does mishuabad mean? Those who know Jewish monetary law are familiar with this word. A shibud is a monetary lien against your property. Someday, B'ez Hashem, you'll own a house, and you'll have a mortgage. And maybe you'll want to sell it. The sale of a house in which there's a mortgage is arranged in a very interesting way. The buyer makes out 2 checks. One to the bank for the balance of the mortgage, and one to the seller for the remainder of what he wants to pay for it. And the bank check has to clear. Nothing happens until the bank check is cleared and the money is deposited in the bank to pay off the mortgage. Only then can the house be transferred. That's the way the law works. That's called a lien, L-I-E-N, on your property. That's a shibud. In the meantime, when you have your house and you took out a mortgage to pay the money for the house, who owns the house?
Bank.
No! You own the house. Somebody slips and falls in the house, you're liable. The bank is not liable. If the house burns down, you take the loss. The bank doesn't take the loss. That's why there's mortgage insurance. No, you own the house, but you can't sell it. You can't sell it without paying off the mortgage first. That's a lien. That's a shibud. It's not yours free and clear. So what does the Haggadah say? It says, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu had not taken us out of Egypt, the Egyptian experience would have had a lien on us. We would have been controlled by it. We would have had a carryover from that experience that would degrade our character. It's because he took us out when and how he did that didn't happen. And you don't have to go any further than the experience of the black population of the United States, who to this day are suffering some of the results of slavery that they experienced because of the way that they were liberated by a military and political movement. There was no great conversion of their status by divine miracles and divine election, receiving the Torah at Sinai, and so forth and so on. There's no question that it had a devastating effect on them, and they're still living out some of the consequences of those effects. Right? That's what I think that the one way to understand it here is much more naturalistic. Sure, Egypt would have decayed, and the Assyrians or the Babylonians would have conquered them, and we would have gone free. But then we would have gone free just through political and military means, and the stamp of the Egyptian experience would have been part of our nature. This way, because Rabbi took us out, so that was we overcame that. That's a very important element with the story. Yeah.
But if everything is like by God's will, then couldn't you say every act is a result of God's freeing of slaves, or of God's intervention?
Why can't God's will and God's actions have variety? Why must they be one-dimensional?
What are the other dimensions of it?
Well, sometimes it transforms your national character, and sometimes it doesn't. God, after all, brings life into existence and also causes death. Both are divine actions. I wouldn't say that death is really life because God did it. God does life and God does death. Does both. Sometimes freedom is achieved through a divine action that transforms national character, and sometimes it's achieved through other means that don't transform national character. God's doing both of them, but he does different things.
So in this instance with the black population, God freed them in a way that didn't transform their national character?
I think that's obvious, right? We do believe that God is behind the process of history, and it certainly didn't transform our national character. It transformed our national character.
So he decided to transform our national character, but not theirs.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so this word, it means something like bondsman, but you're imagining it more so as someone who the bond in question is a thing that is hurting their character from the past? It's been put upon them? Is that how you're like...
It doesn't mean bondsman. When you have take a lien, take a mortgage on your house, no bondsman there. You don't have to work for the bank. It's just a restriction on your total control.
But this word is referring to us. So
Yeah,
what
so-
are we referred to in the context of having a lien against us? What is that?
It means that we would not operate in terms of our own nature, in terms of our own capabilities, in a free and unencumbered way. We'd be bored down by, like some of the commentators actually say, that the 40 years in the wilderness was necessary because they weren't prepared to wage war, because they had spent 90 years as slaves. It had to be outgrown by 40 years in the wilderness. But it was outgrown. Yeah.
I'm somewhat confused still. Is it that if we would have been taken out through more of a more natural means, more political means, is it that we would have stayed in Egypt too long and that would affect our character? Or what exactly is the distinction you're making between the way we were actually taken out versus we would have came out through just more political?
No, it's a good question. I only associate it with time. Let's just rehearse a few facts, right? You had the 10 plagues. Now imagine you have a people, I want to imagine, this is the truth, you have a people who, they've been there for 210 years, the last 90 years they have been enslaved. That's like 2 generations. Some Jews were born in slavery and died in slavery there. Now Moses comes and says, it's over, we're going out. Do they believe, they don't believe, they accept, they don't accept? The plagues start happening. The Midrash tells us that in the 9th plague, which was the plague of darkness, 80% of the Jewish population died. Only 20% went out. Why did they die? Because after 8 plagues, they didn't get it. They didn't get it. They just couldn't make the adjustment to the new reality. So those who were not able to adjust to the new reality, they were eliminated from the population. Then, the day before the Exodus, they were required to slaughter the Paschal sacrifice and do circumcision. Wow, that's asking a lot, and it's a gigantic effort, and it's gigantic and painful, and so forth and so on. And they do it. And then that night, the Egyptian firstborn are dying. Egyptians come and say, "Get out, or we're all dead," and they all leave. I mean, that's not just the economy crumbling and somebody coming in and subverting your chariots so that the walls are open and you can run for it. This is an experience that overwhelms the previous character of the people. And then they come to the Red Sea, the sea splits, they go across, the Egyptians are all drowned, and then they eat a manna falling from heaven, and they have a pillar of cloud and pillar of fire leading them. That's going to make a gigantic mark on the people. It's not a question of being there too long. It's a question of leaving without all of that supernatural, open, revealed intervention, which creates a new character for them. And that's just skimming the surface. Okay, so now it says, we would have been slaves. Now, and even if we were all wise and all discerning, wise and discerning are not really accurate terms, and we're all well-educated, elders, and we all know the Torah, it's a mitzvah for us to recount, I'll change that translation in a minute, recount the exodus from Egypt. You hear the how shall I say, the surprise in the voice of the Haggadah. These people know everything. They understand everything. They're fully conversant with the tradition. Even so, there's a mitzvah. When you say even so, you're saying 2 things. You're saying there's a reason not, but it's overcome by something else, right? He was in Siberia with no coat, and even so he survived. Meaning, to being in Siberia with no coat is a reason to die. Oh, but he didn't die. Something else helped him in such a way that he didn't die. Here we're being told, even though you're fully conversant with the whole Torah, there's such a mitzvah. If you thought the purpose of the mitzvah was to convey information, this would be hard to understand. Because they already have the information. They already have the understanding. So why is there a mitzvah here? What is the mitzvah? And then the Haggadah puts the capstone on it. I'm telling you now, I heard from Rav Bullman, who was a mashgiach here many years ago. A tremendous set of ideas. The more you tell, the more praiseworthy it is. Now, we have as a principle in traditional Jewish literature that brevity is the soul of clear communication. Don't say an extra word unless it's necessary to communicate a piece of information. Brevity gives you, it's easy to memorize, easy to think about. You don't overwhelm the person with too much information. Here it says, the more you talk, the better it is. Just keep talking. Keep talking. That's very strange. That's very strange. Furthermore, the grammar here is strange. It says the saper be Yitzias Mitzrayim. What's the base doing there? It should be the saper s, or the saper with no particle. Saper be, to speak in. And the answer said Rav Bullman, and this is a key to understanding a great deal of the Haggadah, and I hinted at it before. The answer is that the purpose of the evening is to re-experience the Exodus. That's the purpose, that's the mitzvah of the evening, to re-experience it. Not to become informed about it or add to your understanding of it, but to re-experience it. And that's why, even if you know everything, the speaking about it is enabled to re-experience, a little bit like poetry. You know, poetry, first of all, most of it doesn't communicate real facts at all. Describes things which are in the imagination of the author. But sometimes the way it's written, it's clearly meant to be read, like Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Bells, where each stanza ends with the word bells about 15 times. And if it's read effectively, by the end of the poem, you can hear the bells ringing. You can hear them. Bells. Bells. Right? The point of it is to create an experience, and that will explain a great deal of what we say here. And Rav Bullman put it even deeper. In Hasidic Sfarim, it says Pesach is really a contraction of two words. Pe-sach. Pe means mouth, and sach means speaks. The mouth speaks. And he said as follows. The Midrash tells us that the Jews in Egypt worshipped idols. The Malachim, the angels, complained to God twice. Why are you saving this group and destroying that group? They both serve idols. They're both idol worshippers. Meaning that we had lost our grip on our culture altogether. We had deteriorated to the point where, to the angels, we looked indistinguishable from the Egyptians. Just part of one population and one culture. When you lose, now your speech is an expression of your identity. You cannot tell what another person is thinking. You cannot tell what another person's values are unless you have translations of his speech or examples of his speech. Actions will not tell you. That's why it's very important that the oldest linguistic remains on the planet are about 5,800 years old. That leaves us free to say that what we have before that doesn't count what we call human. Neanderthals buried their dead. So I saw actually one of these paleoanthropologists saying they must have believed in the soul, they must have believed in the body's receptive with the soul, and so on. Yeah, maybe, or maybe dead bodies stink, or maybe they have an idea that it's good for the fertility of the land, or who knows what. From the practice of burying your dead, there are 1,000 different ways it could be explained without language to express what's going on inside. The human identity doesn't express itself. So he said, the Medrash tells us that we were in exile, not only physically as slaves, we were in cultural exile. We were in spiritual exile. And because your speech is how you express your identity, our speech was in exile. Our speech wasn't Jewish speech. So when we take the step out of Egypt, when we recover that essential Jewish perspective, then our speech becomes Jewish speech. And that's what the Haggadah is saying here. He's likened to a person who, let's say, lost his vision, became blind. And after 10 years, they invented an operation, and they underwent the operation, he could see. What would he do when they took the bandages off? He would look. What would he look at? Anything. Anything. A light bulb, wastebasket. What difference does it make? I can see. He'd be celebrating vision, not what he sees. Does it have to be Rembrandt? No, he can see now. his vision came back. Here, the speech came. The more you speak, the more the experience you have of expressing that identity that is recovered. That's part of the process of going through the Haggadah. So that gives an expression to these words. And then the saper be means to identify with the story, to relive the story. Just like when it says that Moses went out from the palace of Pharaoh and to see his brethren, it says, Vayar be sivlosam. It doesn't say Vayar es sivlosam. He saw their sufferings. But Vayar be means he empathized. He felt their sufferings. Here too, you're experiencing the story. Through the story, you are vicariously experiencing the events. You're not just reading it as information. That's what's locked up in this passage. Yeah.
So, can you say Vayar B'Sivlo Sam, can you kind of translate that as, and now he saw, but what did he see with? He saw like kind of with their suffering, like those were the glasses he was looking through.
An interesting thought. The Beis in Hebrew does mean you do something with an implement.
No, that was his perspective.
I don't know. It's an interesting question, an interesting thought. I never thought of that way of reading the grammar. He used their. I'm not sure. It's an interesting suggestion. Very interesting suggestion. I have to think about it as some people know how Hebrew grammar works better than I do. Yeah.
Is the central aspect of our speech that the Haggadah is able to return to us or sharpen?
What?
The Haggadah, it's saying it returns to us our speech, our original language, or
Yeah.
an aspect of it.
Yeah.
Because languages all can communicate, similar things. One language can communicate, 3 different languages can communicate table. But there seems to be something particular about Jewish speech, which, when it's returned to us, it improves our character, or it does something substantial.
We spoke about this when we spoke about the fact that he elevated us from all tongues. I spoke about the fact that the languages are not intertranslatable, and key concepts like shalom are not translated correctly, because, as I said then, maybe some people here now that weren't there a few days ago, shalom in English is translated as peace. It's also translated as hello, but I'm discarding that for the moment. Translated as peace. And peace in English is a negative concept. Peace is the absence of conflict, the absence of disturbance. In English, you can say the graveyard is very peaceful. And that's true, it is. But there's no shalom in the graveyard. Absolutely not. Because shalom comes from shalem, which means complete, integrated, whole, functional. The word shalem in Hebrew is used for what we call perfection. So that, now, as you say, if you're using shalom like the average Israeli on the street to mean the opposite of war, and then suddenly you get an insight that shalom means perfection, completion, and completeness, that's a revolution in your thinking. It's a revolution in your thinking. Right? And that revolution orients you in an entirely different way. We're not looking just to put the guns down. We're looking for something much, much more profound. So I think that's the idea. The speech becomes Jewish speech.
And can you give an example of what the central, element of our speech that's imparted to us from this? Because you can't give the whole language.
Well, I just gave you an example. Shalom is an example.
And you think that's the central point of the Haggadah, or that's the main thing out of the speech that it gives us?
I don't know if I'm talking about the central point. I'm saying that it has this, the mitzvah is to relive the events. Okay, let's go on a little bit further. Now you'll see the next few paragraphs in the Haggadah, which could look just randomly assembled, all express this idea. That's why it's such a rich idea. Well, it happened. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Azariah, Rabbi Kiva, and Rabbi Tarfon celebrating the Seder in Bnei Brak. They were discussing the exodus from Egypt the entire night. By the way, it's the same words, Mesaprim be Yitzias Mitzrayim, with the bays.
So you can say that enabled them to speak.
The entire night, until the students came and said to them, our teachers, the time has arrived for reading the morning Shema, which means the time of the mitzvah of the Haggadah has ended already. It's over. Right? Now, how am I going to understand this? All 5 of them sort of lost track of time. These are one of the greatest Tanoim. They did the mitzvah when the mitzvah wasn't applying. That's really a little bit wild. And the commentators point out something very interesting. All 5 of them each one of them did not have ancestors who were enslaved in Egypt, because some are Levium and some are come from converts. Not a single one had an ancestor who was enslaved in Egypt. Now, you can explain this by saying that they were using their speech to relive it, and they were in the midst of a vivid experience. Then you could lose track of time. Whereas if it says, study the Mishnah for an hour and a half, okay, so I'm studying, the alarm goes off, it's over, on to the next mitzvah. And if you understand that none of them could trace it to their ancestry, and yet they were so involved in re-experiencing it through the mitzvah of speaking it out, then you understand what this is telling you. It's telling you that this is the kind of experience that we're looking for. These were the greatest Tanoim, and this experience, this event, it belies the experience that they had when they did it. Otherwise, it's quite hard to understand what it's telling you. Yeah.
Is this saying Sof Zman Kriyashma, or is it saying like right in the morning? Like
No. Why Sof Zman Kriyashma? No. They would do it. They would be on like the Daven Nates. They would say it at the earliest possible time.
Right,
I'm going to wait for Sof Zman Kriyashma. Why would they do that?
no, but yeah, okay.
Why don't Levim have ancestors who were?
Because the Levim were it says explicitly, they were not enslaved. And the Midrash explains as follows: How did Pharaoh get the Jews enslaved? You'll see that Pharaoh had all sorts of very clever social, political, and psychological strategies. He declared a day of national service for everyone in the kingdom. That's today. Everybody's working to enrich the kingdom. Fine, and everybody goes out and does the day's work. The end of the day's work, he says to the Jews, and you tomorrow also, and the day after also, and the day after also. That's how he sucked them in. The Levium didn't participate. They didn't participate in the first day. They said, no, we're not doing that.
Why did they say no?
I don't know, but I mean, they are a part. They didn't participate in the golden calf. The Levium were sort of, and what happened then was they became the sort of like the capos in Europe. They were responsible for seeing that the Jews who were working would produce their quotas, and if the quotas weren't worked, then the Levim were the ones who were punished for it. They became the intermediaries. But they could move freely. That's how Moses and Aaron could come and go to Pharaoh and go back to the people and walk freely. What do you mean? Why aren't you making bricks? Levim didn't have to make bricks.
Moses was a Levi.
I'm sorry?
Moses was a Levi.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, Aaron is his brother, right? And Aaron's the high priest. So, yeah.
Was it that they said no, like we won't work, or rather the Pharaoh or Egypt didn't acknowledge the fact that they didn't work, and then
I don't know. All I know is they said no, and they didn't do it. And then when the question was the next day, keep doing what you did yesterday, it didn't apply to them.
all the Jews should have said no.
Well, yeah, they should have. Okay. But okay. Enough. Now, watch this, especially for the people who are worried about misogyny. Rabbi Zari said, I'm like a man of 70, yet I was never able to convince my colleagues that one is obligated to mention the Exodus at night. We had this discussion. Is it only in the daytime that you mention the Exodus from Egypt? Or is it also at night? I say it's also at night. My colleague said, no, only in the daytime. Until Ben Zoma came along, and he explained the particular verse. The verse says that you may remember the day when you came out of the land of Egypt, all the days of your life. This is the verse that says that you should mention the Exodus from Egypt. What would you have lost if you had left out the word all? Suppose the verse had said that you remember the days of Egypt, they came out of Egypt, the days of your life. Would you have thought, oh, that doesn't include Tuesdays? Or, the 14th of March doesn't include the 14th of March. Would you have volunteered the thought that maybe not all are included? I don't think anybody would have dreamt it. You should mention it, the days of your life. You are automatically known That includes all of the. So why does the pasuk say all? Why does it add the word all? Apparently, the word all comes to add something which I might not have imagined, something I wouldn't have normally associated. So Ben Zoma said, the days of your life really refers to the days, daytime. All the days of your life includes the nights also, and it means you do it twice in 24 hours. That's what Ben Zoma taught Rabbi Elazar Azariah to say to the sages. Now, what did the sages do? Did they knuckle under and say, oh, you got it? No, they didn't. They said the days of your life indicates this life. But all the days of your life includes the times of the Mashiach also. Okay, so now this is a challenging Mishnah. This Mishnah, you have to say, why did one choose nighttime? And why did one choose the time of the Mashiach? And how would they answer up the other one who said the opposite way? But what I want to stress, before I get into that, I don't know if I'll finish it today, but what I want to stress is this. This Mishnah is discussing a mitzvah. The mitzvah of mentioning the Exodus from Egypt every day. Why is it here? It's here for contrast. After all, you did this mitzvah in shul. You did this when you davened Ma'ariv before you came home. So what are you doing at home? What's the Haggadah about? If it's a question of mentioning it, you did the mentioning already. Therefore, you must conclude the Haggadah is doing a different mitzvah. The Haggadah Levincha isn't the mitzvah of mentioning it. Okay, so that's already an opening to what Rav Bowman said. It's not the mitzvah of mentioning it, so then what is it? It's a mitzvah of reciting it and thereby re-experiencing it. That's an introduction to what he said. Now, the two ribuyim, the two things that are included here, can be explained as follows. There are many explanations, but it can be explained as follows. There has to be a reason why you might have thought at night you wouldn't mention the Exodus from Egypt, and why in the times of the Mashiach you wouldn't have mentioned the Exodus. Nighttime is throughout our literature a symbol for exile. And here the question will be, if we are presently in a situation where we're not free, what point is there in mentioning the fact that 1,500 years ago or 3,000 years ago, we were slaves and we were set free because now we're slaves again? What was the profit for us? So the mitzvah tells you that's a wrong thought. It's a wrong thought. Say it now anyway. Why? Because of what I said 17 minutes ago. For those who don't know me, that's a joke. It means sometime in this hour. No, you don't have to laugh. Don't be polite. It's okay. We said that what happened in the Exodus from Egypt is the recovery of a Jewish identity and the stamping of that identity on our national culture, on our national nature. That's not reversible. Whether you're politically free and physically free, or whether you're politically enslaved and physically enslaved, can be reversed. But the nature of the person's identity cannot be reversed. That's why in the camps in Europe during the Holocaust, they did whatever they could to try to get matzah and try to recite the Seder. It wasn't a paradox. It wasn't a foolishness. It wasn't just an imagination, because they remained Jews. In the persecution, they remained Jews. That couldn't be taken away from them. So you might have thought you wouldn't say it at night. The Torah tells you do say it at night. Times of the Mashiach, we have verses that say explicitly the miracles that will take place in the times of the Mashiach will outclass the Exodus from Egypt 100 to 1. So you might have thought, if after the Mashiach comes, we're going to praise God for the great things that He's done for us, we'll praise Him for the greatest things that He's done for us, which is the coming of the Mashiach, and the minor events of the Exodus from Egypt will be forgotten because they don't compare. And the answer is no. You will say it even at the times of Mashiach. Partly because you didn't get to the Mashiach in one jump. The Exodus from Egypt was the groundwork which laid the way for the whole set of historical experiences and performances which led to the Mashiach. And therefore you don't throw away it's sort of like throwing away your baby pictures. You're 35. That doesn't depict you now, but it depicts where I came from. And where I came from is part of who I am. And without that, I wouldn't be who I am. So therefore, it's not forgotten. So each one would have a reason why you might have thought you shouldn't say it, And the Mishnah comes to tell you that you should say it in the two of them. What's left unexplained now is how each one answers the other one's argument. Rabbi Elazar Ansari says you say it at night. He says saying it at night is preferable than saying it at times Mashiach. And the Chachamim say it's preferable to say it at Mashiach and rather not say it at night. It's only one ribu, it's only one extra. One word called can add in one of them, but not both. That I'm going to leave on it. So that's much more complicated, much more subtle. Yeah. Okay.